It's a great pleasure to be here today. I just want to say at the beginning, I want to give a nod to my co-author who's on the first screen here, Justin Sherman, whose intellectual insight and leadership without that, this would not have been possible, and I'm very grateful to him. So to jump right in, I was invigorated and intrigued by the previous session, and I think that what Professor Mani talked about is exactly the kind of thing that I want to expand on. In the AI index, you'll notice that she had the four categories in the AI index, and one of them was education. And this is the conversation that I want to have. There's a question that we ask all the time about artificial intelligence and education, and that's how do we prepare, educate the rising generation to use artificial intelligence to improve society. It's so much of the research and the kinds of things we're looking at is how do we make education better to teach about AI. Engineers, computer scientists, a little bit about policy and ethics, but really it's about the technical skills that we need. We're asking this and we're researching this. There is an unasked question that I think that Professor Mani touched on a little bit, but I want to expand on today, which is how do we use artificial intelligence in education? And I think she was finding that there is some interest and some potential there, but specifically in public education. And I'll go into a little bit more about what we mean by that. Now remember, and again, this builds on what she was saying, AI is not a thing. It is a method. And AI processes can really be used in a lot of different settings to do a lot of different things. They can be adapted. There was a great communication scholar from the 1950s who said communications processes don't matter unless you tie them to something. They're very agnostic in what they do, and AI processes can be used for both good and for bad. But it is a process. It's a research method that we use in order to implement things that we want to implement. So why hasn't AI been better distributed in public education? Well, number one, public education is part of the bureaucracy. It's part of governments, and it's traditionally slow to change. It's hard to adapt to technology with the speed with which technology changes. But public bureaucracy, it takes its time sometimes to get things done. That is something that we can all smile and nod our head about, but it is true all over the world. Maybe very small countries with smaller bureaucracies can work a little bit more efficiently, but large ones, it's very difficult to get public bureaucracy to change. AI is a relatively new tool for the public sector. It's been used in the private sector a lot. You see a lot of advances in the commercial and private sector, but for the public sector, it's relatively new and still very much in the infant stages. And most importantly to me for this particular presentation, there are certain public sectors, such as the military and the economy, that always get more attention than public education. Public education is necessary. It's there, kind of like healthcare. We need those kinds of things. We need that kind of support. But we talk more about other public sector categories, either not at all or before we talk about those like education. So we did a qualitative study, and the goal was to understand the heuristics of AI usage. What are the ways that AI is being used in public education in different political and cultural contexts? We used China, India, and the United States, but not because they're the only players in AI, but certainly because they are poised to be among the most influential. Again, something that came out in the earlier presentations here. And there are lots of other countries, Israel in particular, that's doing a lot of very good work in AI development. But again, more for the private sector and for the military than for other sectors in public. But we'll use China, India, and the United States. So for the next few slides, I'm going to go through some of the things that we found in each one of these countries. Now, know that this is not a definitive list at all, but these are just examples of the kinds of things that we found, and we've written a paper about this that is close to being published that has a little bit more detail in this, but I want to give you a taste of this. So in the United States, there are two main uses of artificial intelligence in public education. Number one is student safety and to prevent student violence. And this is something if you've watched the news at all in the United States, you know that we we have an issue with this. This can be really problematic because facial recognition on its outset is problematic, and whether or not how good it is at identifying things. But also in the United States, one thing that has become very clear is we have some great legal protections of minors, people who are less than 18 years of age. And this kind of facial recognition in public schools has created huge databases of student faces, and that has caused some problems. And then the other way that in the United States is to monitor discourse. That many school districts right now are tracking social media posts. And this is not a formal or official thing. Normally, this is a social media discourse that either hashtags schools or they track students, student names or groups that they have. But they're monitoring social discourse. And this is an example from an article that we found that shows questionable content for possible self-harm, bullying, and harassment, and general questionable content. And so schools are watching this, and they're confronting students with the kind of language that they might be using online. Some of which may be in jest and may not be real, but they're trying to be very, very careful with the kind of language that they see their students using. So U.S. public education institutions are likely to adopt AI solutions only if it has already been tested by someone else. They are not going to be the ones who take the risk on it. They want to make sure that it's been tested and they know what's going on, or if it's mandated by local and federal government. They just don't go out of their way to do anything at all in AI unless they're told they have to do it by the groups that organize and control them. China. So two main uses of AI. First of all, in China, there were very high level references to the importance of AI. Lots of public statements by the national level government on AI. Lots of plans and goals about AI. But this one that was much more focused on STEM education than on the uses. But on the other side, there have some very detailed, granular ideas for improving educational efficiency. For example, Yuan Fudao has created this company where teachers can photograph students' homework, upload it to the site, and an algorithm will correct it. That's extremely granular to have to have teachers not need to grade anymore. So obviously this would probably be more math than other kinds of things and not writing. But these are the things that are available to public schools right now, is to be able to do that. Another one is there's quite a bit of use of AI for attendance in China, of monitoring through facial recognition and making sure that students are in present and in their seats. So the takeaways from China. AI represents an extension of the country's cultural and educational values. That is, from the national level, they want to see any kind of technological development that they can do, and they will impose it at any possible level that they can, and control as much of the education process as possible. They use technology. China is at the forefront of using technology in these control kinds of ways, and they certainly do that as well in the education process. But again, there's not anything really in between. It's small companies doing small things that are very much on a checklist of things that might be helpful in education, and then there are really broad pronouncements on how they want to use AI. So then we come to India. So India has by far the most clearly laid out goals for AI in public education of the three countries. The 2018 National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence addresses both STEM education and AI uses in the educational process. Just as an example, there were partnerships with Microsoft to train teachers in AI classroom use. This was, again, that in-between space that China, I just couldn't find in China, we couldn't find in China, which was to try to make it possible for AI to be used in the public sector broadly across the country, not forcing it, but providing opportunities for that. And after that, the second thing is there is just this huge AI educational ecosystem. Similar to China in this way, China has these small companies that are doing lots of things. For example, Imbibe, which I understand is on the agenda today. These personalized learning outcomes. They matter for trying to understand how students learn. And you can look at their website, but among a number of examples, this was certainly one way that the one company that can do this. So India takeaways. There's a countrywide recognition about the potential value of AI-enabled public education initiatives. But there are things that are still really in the developmental stages. There is so much going on here. We couldn't list everything that was happening in India, but a lot of it is really in the developmental stages. And then I'm going to add one more thing that I think India needs to take away from this that's in the big picture overview. So final observations, and then we'll take some questions. So number one, AI is so rich and ripe for personalized learning, to be able to understand where students are in the moment and what they can do. And even in the same classroom, you could provide online activities that would help a student who is struggling with math and help a student who was really gifted at math, and they can still be in the same classroom and thus gain the benefits of social and other kinds of things. And they may be opposite in writing, and so there's a real way to use AI for personalized learning. Surveillance on minors. This is a real issue, and this is an issue for any country. Not because surveillance isn't an important thing for minors, it can also help protect them, but because we really need to watch what happens to that data. Is it protected? Is it secure? Is it only being used for the kinds of things that it was designed to be used for? There's an understanding that AI could exacerbate an existing digital divide. This is something that we've been talking about for a while. Digital divides exist. There are information haves and information have-nots. And it's really important to understand that AI, while important, it can really leave people behind. Those who are in more rural areas have connectivity issues. India is one of the top phone users in the world, but there's a difference between smartphones and flip phones. And so just things like that there's a real potential to leave people behind by implementing AI. But there's a real potential to bring people forward as well. There's a problem of bias. One of the things that we're seeing in all of the literature is that you can really find that AI doesn't really see different kinds of people in different ways. So there's a real possibility for bias. And political culture matters. The way AI is being implemented in the public sector and the public education sector in all three countries is extremely varied. Countries can learn from each other, but it may not be possible to find the things that have been implemented in one country. It may not be possible to implement in the other.